My sister asked if I needed a job application while Dad chuckled, cutting into his steak. They see a failure across the table, a girl who plays with computers. What they do not see is the notification confirming the wire transfer went through at 8 this morning. Dad just mentioned a weird name on the shareholder logs. I smiled. I did not spend $600,000 just to ruin dinner. I bought the whole company. My name is Harper Quinn, and if you asked the three people sitting around me at this mahogany table, they would tell you I am a tragedy in a blazer. We were at the Chop House in downtown Cleveland, the kind of place where the waiters wear white gloves and the menu does not list prices because if you have to ask, you are in the wrong room. This was my father's arena. Robert Quinn held court here once a month, usually to celebrate a victory that involved diesel fuel, shipping containers, and his own ego. Tonight, the air smelled of truffles and red wine, but mostly it smelled of my family's suffocating condescension. My sister, Brooke, swirled her Cabernet, the diamonds on her wrist catching the low light of the chandelier. She looked at me with that pitying smile she perfected in high school, the one that said she loved me despite my glaring inadequacies. "Does anyone have a job application handy?" Brooke asked, her voice carrying just loud enough for the table next to us to hear. "I think the valet is hiring. Harper, honey, you could probably handle parking cars, right? It does not require much strategic thinking. You just follow the lines." My father let out a guttural laugh, the sound vibrating through the table. "Good one, Brooke, but let's be fair. Harper would probably try to rebrand the parking tickets and cause a traffic jam." My mother, Elaine, dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. She laughed, a light, airy sound that was supposed to soften the blow but only drove the knife in deeper. "Oh, stop it, you two," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Harper is just finding herself. Remember that little studio she had last year? What was it called? Bright Lights? Brightwave?" "Brightwave Brand Lab," I corrected, keeping my voice steady. I cut into my filet mignon, focusing on the pink center. "And it was a digital branding agency. Mom, not a studio." Right, Mom said, taking a sip of water. "It was cute, very creative. Like when you went through that phase of making friendship bracelets in middle school. It is good to get that out of your system before you have to join the real world." I chewed slowly, forcing the meat down past the lump in my throat. They talked about Brightwave like it was a lemonade stand. They did not see the nights I slept on the floor of a rented office space because I could not afford heat in my apartment. They did not know about the 300 cold emails I sent every single week, or the way I taught myself Python and SEO optimization until my eyes burned. To them, Brightwave was just a cute little failure because I eventually shut it down. They did not know I shut it down to pivot, not to quit. Dad cleared his throat, signaling that the comedy hour was over and the sermon was beginning. He leaned back in his leather chair, looking every bit the logistics tycoon he believed himself to be. Robert Quinn, CEO of Redwood Axis Logistics, a big fish in the industrial pond of Ohio. "Look, Harper," Dad said, pointing his steak knife at me. "There is no shame in admitting defeat. Not everyone is cut out to be a captain of industry. The world needs worker bees. It needs people who punch a clock and go home. You have a good heart, but you are not built for the pressure. You live in a dream world. You need to be more realistic." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the gray in his beard and the arrogance in his eyes. He thought he was giving me fatherly advice. He thought he was saving me from my own ambition. "I appreciate the concern, Dad," I said, "but I think I have a handle on things." "Do you?" Brooke interjected, leaning forward. "Because from where we sit, you look like you are unemployed and living off savings. Meanwhile, in the real world, things are moving fast. Tell her, Dad." Dad beamed, his chest puffing out. "We are making it official tonight. As of the 1st of next month, Brooke is the new Vice President of Internal Operations at Redwood Axis." "Oh, Brooke!" Mom clapped her hands together softly. "That is wonderful. I am so proud of you. Finally, some good news to tell the club." "I am getting the corner office on the 12th floor," Brooke said, looking directly at me, daring me to show jealousy. And Dad approved the lease on the new Porsche Macan, company car. Obviously, I need to look the part when I'm meeting with the regional directors. Absolutely, Dad said. You represent the Quinn legacy now. We cannot have you driving around in something sensible. You are a leader. Leaders eat first. I took a sip of my water, the ice cold against my teeth. They were celebrating a title, a fancy car, a corner office with a view of the rusted bridges over the Cuyahoga River. They were discussing the furniture arrangements while the house was burning down around them. I knew things about Redwood Axis that even the new vice president of internal operations did not know. I knew their fleet maintenance costs had spiked 30% in the last 2 quarters because they were deferring repairs. I knew their client retention rate in the mid-sized manufacturing sector had dropped by 12% because their tracking system was antiquated. And I knew the most dangerous piece of information of all. Redwood Axis was heavily leveraged and dependent on a silent shareholder named Martin Hale, who had been desperate to liquidate his position for 6 months. Dad believed in handshakes and golf course deals. He thought the internet was a glorified phone book. He did not realize that for the last year, while he was laughing at my unemployment, I had been building a digital consulting empire under a pseudonym. I was the strategist behind the digital transformation of 3 of his biggest competitors. I had the cash flow, the leverage, and the data. And as of this morning, I had Martin Hale's shares. Harper, Brooke said, snapping me out of my thoughts. What is your plan? Are you going to try another little art project? Or can I ask HR to send you over some entry-level clerical postings? We always need someone to file the bills of lading. It is easy work, hard to mess up. Mom chuckled. Maybe that would be good for her. Structure. She needs structure. I am fine. Brooke, I said. Actually, I have been very busy. Doing what? Dad asked, skeptical. Updating your blog? Investing, I said simply. The table went silent for a second, and then they all burst out laughing. It was a genuine belly-shaking laughter. Dad actually wiped a tear from his eye. Investing, Dad roared. With what money? Did you find a $20 bill in your winter coat? Oh, that is precious, Mom said. Investing, like day trading on your phone? Honey, please be careful. You will lose what little you have left. It is not day trading, I said. It is strategic acquisition. Brooke rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might hurt herself. Okay, Warren Buffett, let's focus on reality. I need to pick out the leather for my office chairs. Dad, do you think black or cognac? Cognac, Dad said decisively. It commands respect. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, frowning as a notification lit up the screen. He squinted at it, his reading glasses tucked into his jacket pocket, so he had to hold the phone at arm's length. That is odd, Dad muttered. What is it, Robert? Mom asked, concerned by the shift in his tone. It is an email from Jenkins in accounting, Dad said, shaking his head. He sent over the updated capitalization table for the quarterly review. Says there was a transfer of ownership recorded today. My heart hammered against my ribs. A slow, heavy rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. This was it. Probably just Martin moving some assets around for his trust, Dad said, dismissing it. Although, this is strange. It lists the new majority holder under a holding company, Coleman Meridian Holdings, LLC. Never heard of them, Brooke said, bored. Is that a competitor? No, Dad said. Probably just a shell for tax purposes. But look at this note here. It lists the primary beneficiary. He squinted harder. It says, Harper Quinn. Dad looked up. He looked at Brooke. Then he looked at Mom. Then, finally, his eyes landed on me. Confusion washed over his face, quickly followed by amusement. Jenkins must be drinking again, Dad said, chuckling nervously. He put Harper's name on the shareholder log. Can you imagine? Must be a typo. Maybe he meant to type something else and autocorrect got him. Or maybe he is confusing my daughters. Clearly, Brooke scoffed. Why would your name be on a capitalization table? Harper? Unless you bought a single share on an app or something. It has to be an error, Mom agreed. Robert, you need to talk to Jenkins. That is sloppy work. Professional documents should not have typos. I will call him in the morning and chew him out, Dad said, shoving the phone back into his pocket. Ridiculous. Harper Quinn. The day that happens is the day I retire to the moon. I picked up my wine glass. It was a Pinot Noir, dark and complex. I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. They wanted me to laugh with them. They wanted me to agree that it was a hilarious mistake, a clerical error that we could all joke about for years to come. Remember the time the accountant accidentally thought Harper owned the company? I set the glass down. The crystal made a sharp click against the table. It is not a typo, Dad, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a razor. Dad paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. Excuse me? The email, I said. It is not a typo, and it is not a mistake. Brooke laughed, but it sounded brittle this time. Harper, stop it. You are embarrassing yourself. Do not try to take credit for a clerical error. It is sad. I am not taking credit for an error, I said. I am taking credit for the wire transfer. I bought Martin Hale out, all of him, every single share. I signed the papers this morning at 9 o'clock. The funds cleared at noon. The state filings were updated by 4. Dad stared at me. His face went slack. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered there all night began to slide off, replaced by a look of genuine bewilderment. He looked like a man trying to read a map in a language he did not speak. You, Dad started, then stopped. You bought Martin out? Martin Hale? Do you have any idea how much his position is worth? We are talking about millions of dollars. Harper, stop playing games. I know exactly how much it is worth, I said. Because I paid it. I leveraged my portfolio, liquidated my position in 3 tech startups you told me were a waste of time, and secured private financing based on the projected valuation of Redwood Axis once I fix your operational inefficiencies. Inefficiencies? Brooke snapped. I run operations. I know, I said. That is why the margins are down. The table went dead silent. The waiter approached to refill the water glasses, took one look at my father's face, and immediately turned around and walked away. Mom looked between us, her eyes wide. Harper, is this a joke? Is this some kind of prank for TikTok? No, Mom, I said. It is business. Dad pulled his phone back out. His hands were shaking slightly, not much, but enough that I could see the vibration in his fingertips. He unlocked the screen and opened the email again. He zoomed in on the document. He scrolled down. He was looking for the punchline. He was looking for the part where it said, "Just kidding." He would not find it. Coleman Meridian Holdings, Dad whispered, reading the text. Beneficiary, Harper Quinn, 51% controlling interest. He looked up at me. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking older than his 60 years. For the first time in my life, he wasn't looking at his daughter, the failure. He was looking at a predator who had just walked into his cave and eaten his lunch. I suggest you read the attachment carefully tonight. Dad, I said, picking up my purse. Especially the part about the special shareholder meeting next week. We have a lot to discuss regarding the future of our company. I stood up. I did not wait for the check. I did not wait for permission. Enjoy the steak, I said. I hear the cognac chairs are very comfortable. Brooke, you might want to enjoy them while you can. The valet brought my car around, a sensible sedan that my father had looked at with open disdain earlier in the evening, but I barely registered the chill in the air as I slid behind the wheel. The adrenaline of the confrontation was beginning to recede, replaced by the cold, hard ache of memory. My family thought this victory was a sudden stroke of luck, a winning lottery ticket I had stumbled upon while playing make-believe business. They had no idea that the road to buying Redwood Axis did not begin with a wire transfer this morning. It began 3 years ago, in a studio apartment that smelled perpetually of damp drywall and desperation. I drove toward my apartment, but my mind drifted back to the headquarters of Brightwave Brand Lab. That was the grandiose name I had given to the 400-square-foot box I lived in on the east side of town. My office chair was a hand-me-down that listed to the left, and my boardroom was a folding table from a discount store. The Wi-Fi was so temperamental that I had to hold my breath during file uploads, praying the signal would hold long enough to send a brand kit to a client. I remembered walking into the local branch of First National Bank, wearing a blazer I had found at a consignment shop, clutching a business plan I had spent 2 weeks perfecting. I was asking for $5,000, just $5,000. I needed a better server for hosting client sites and a subscription to premium analytics software. The loan officer, a man with coffee stains on his tie, barely glanced at my projections. He looked at my credit history, which was thin but spotless, and then he looked at the business model. "It is a little abstract, Ms. Quinn," he had said, sliding the folder back across the desk. "Digital branding for industrial clients? It is high risk. We need collateral. Do you have real estate? A cosigner?" I did not have a cosigner. I could not ask Dad. 2 weeks prior, I had watched Robert Quinn write a check for $200,000 to his golf buddy, Uncle Jerry, for a chain of indoor golf simulators that went bankrupt in 6 months. Dad had not asked for a business plan. He had not asked about collateral. He just liked Jerry, and he liked golf. That was how the Quinns did business, gut instinct and boys' club loyalty. When I walked out of that bank, humiliated and empty-handed, I realized that in my father's world, competence mattered less than camaraderie. My family had a selective memory. Tonight at dinner, they laughed about the times I lost a client, or when a project stalled. They retold the story of the candle shop website I built for a friend as if that was the pinnacle of my career. They conveniently forgot, or perhaps never bothered to notice, the grind that happened in the shadows. They did not know about Miller Machining. It was my first real break. They were a mid-sized parts manufacturer in Dayton, bleeding clients to overseas competitors. The owner, a gruff man named Frank, gave me a shot because I was the only consultant who did not try to sell him a billboard. I worked for 3 weeks straight, sleeping 4 hours a night, rebuilding their entire digital presence. I did not just make a logo, I built a lead generation engine. I worked hundreds of hours of overtime for free, tweaking keywords and analyzing traffic patterns, just to prove the concept worked. I remember the video call with the marketing director of a heavy equipment distributor in Indiana 6 months later. His name was Dave, and he looked exhausted. "We are dying here, Harper," he had told me. "The sales team is making cold calls and getting hung up on. We need leads." I spent the next month overhauling their email outreach and redesigning their landing pages. I used A/B testing to refine the messaging until we found the exact phrasing that made procurement managers click request quote. When the quarterly numbers came in, their inbound leads had tripled. Dave was almost crying on the Zoom call. That contract was the first time I saw 5 figures hit my bank account at once. I did not call home to brag. I knew what the reaction would be. Dad would ask if it was a one-time thing, or imply that I got lucky. Mom would ask if I was saving for a wedding. So I kept my mouth closed and reinvested every penny back into the business. The memory that stung the most, the one that truly fueled the fire that burned down the dinner table tonight, happened exactly 1 year ago. It was my birthday dinner. We were at an Italian place that night. I had just landed a major contract with a freight forwarding company in Chicago, and I was feeling brave. I tried to explain the concept of inbound marketing to Dad, thinking maybe, just maybe, he would respect the hustle. He had listened for about 2 minutes before holding up a hand to stop me. "Sweetheart," he had said, his voice dripping with that unbearable paternal condescension. "I am sure your little internet pictures are very pretty, but real business isn't about colors and logos. It is about logistics. It is about margins. To run a company, you have to be better at Excel than you are at drawing. You have to understand the blood and sweat of the industry." I had shut my mouth, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks, but it was not Dad's lecture that broke me that night. It was Brooke. She was sitting across from me, and she didn't say a word. She just looked at me. It was a soft look, A gentle look. It was the look you give a toddler who is wearing a plastic fireman's helmet and holding a garden hose. She looked at me like I was playing a game that everyone else had outgrown. That pity was sharper than any insult Dad could have hurled. She saw me as harmless. She saw me as the little sister who needed to be protected from the harsh realities of the world. That night, I went home and cried for exactly 10 minutes. Then I washed my face, opened my laptop, and made a decision. I was done trying to be Robert Quinn's daughter. I was done trying to get a pat on the head. If they thought I didn't understand logistics, I would learn it better than they did. I pivoted Brightwave. I stopped taking clients from fashion boutiques or tech startups. I zeroed in on my father's world. I read every trade journal I could find. I learned about intermodal transport, last-mile delivery challenges, and fuel surcharges. I marketed myself exclusively to logistics and transportation firms in the Midwest. Slowly, the name Harper Quinn began to circulate in the industry, but not as the heiress to Redwood Axis. I was the fixer. I was the digital mercenary you hired when your old-school sales tactics stopped working. I sat in meetings with CEOs who competed directly with my father. They respected me because I brought them data, not anecdotes. I helped them steal market share from companies that were too slow to adapt. Companies exactly like Redwood Axis. It was strictly business, until the night of the Stonebridge call. I was consulting for Stonebridge Harbor Capital, a boutique private equity firm looking for distressed assets in the industrial sector. We were on a late-night Zoom call, analyzing potential acquisition targets. The screen was filled with spreadsheets, complex, beautiful Excel sheets that would have made my father dizzy. "Okay," the lead analyst said, pulling up a new slide. "Next target. This one is interesting. Redwood Axis Logistics, based in Cleveland." My breath hitched. I leaned closer to the screen. "Financials are messy," the analyst continued. "Revenue is flat for 3 years. Margins are compressing, but the real issue is the cap table. Majority owner is Robert Quinn, but he is heavily leveraged, and there is a silent partner, a guy named Martin Hale. He holds 49%. Our intel says Hale is 70 years old, living in Vermont, and he is desperate to liquidate. He wants out, but Quinn doesn't have the cash to buy him, and Quinn's ego won't let him sell the company to a competitor." I sat there, staring at the digital projection of my father's empire. It wasn't a fortress. It was a house of cards. Dad was playing the big shot at the chop house, buying steaks and leasing Porsches for Brooke, while his company was teetering on the edge of a hostile takeover. "It is a classic value trap," the analyst concluded. "Good bones, bad management. If someone could buy out Hale and force a modernization strategy, this thing could print money. But Hale is picky. He won't sell to a chop shop firm." I muted my microphone. The room was dark, the only light coming from the laptop screen. I looked at the little box in the corner that showed my own video feed. I saw a woman who had been underestimated her entire life. I saw the girl who was told she was too dreamy, too soft, too focused on pretty pictures. I realized then that my father was right about one thing. The world does need leaders. But he was wrong about who the leader was. He was waiting for a son he never had, or trying to mold Brooke into a version of himself. He never looked at me and saw a successor. He only saw a liability. I unmuted my microphone. "I know Martin Hale," I said to the Stonebridge team, "and I know exactly how to structure a deal that gets him his exit without alerting Robert Quinn until the ink is dry." The memory faded as I parked my car in the garage of my building, a much nicer building than the one I started in. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence. That night on the Zoom call, after the meeting ended, I had stayed in the dark for a long time. I had looked at my reflection in the black screen of the monitor. My face was the same, but the eyes were different. They were cold. They were calculating. I had realized that if my father refused to give me a seat at the table, I would not beg for a folding chair. I would buy the building, evict the landlord, and sit wherever I damn well pleased. Tonight was not just a dinner. It was the first return on my investment. And tomorrow, when I walked into Redwood Axis, I would not be walking in as a daughter. I would be walking in as the boss. Martin Hale was a ghost in the corporate structure of Redwood Axis. To the employees on the loading docks, he was a myth. To my father, he was a nuisance, a silent partner who lived in Vermont, cashed his dividend checks, and occasionally sent annoying emails about operational efficiency that Dad deleted without reading. But to me, staring at the due diligence reports illuminated by the blue light of my monitor, Martin Hale was the key to the kingdom. He was nearly 70 years old. The intelligence report from Stonebridge Harbor Capital described him as old money, conservative, risk-averse, and fatigued. He held 49% of the company stock, a legacy from when he and my grandfather had done business decades ago. The report also noted that Martin was desperate to retire, but stubbornly refused to sell his shares to what he called vulture funds. He did not want to see the company stripped for parts, the assets liquidated, and the pension fund raided. He had a conscience. That was his weakness. And paradoxically, it was my only way in. The partners at Stonebridge had suggested I act as a bridge. They wanted me to massage the relationship, get Martin comfortable with the idea of selling, and then they would swoop in, buy the shares, and likely install their own management team. They offered me a generous consulting fee. It was enough money to pay off my student loans and buy a decent car. A year ago, I would have taken it. A year ago, I would have been grateful just to be in the room. But as I combed through the operational data, I saw something Stonebridge did not. They saw a dying logistics firm. I saw a sleeping giant. The fundamental infrastructure of Redwood Axis was sound. It was just starving for digital integration. If I applied the same inbound marketing and automated tracking systems I had built for my other clients, I could turn the cash flow positive in 18 to 24 months. I did not want a consulting fee. I wanted the asset. The idea formed at 3 a.m. It was reckless. It was terrifying. It was exactly the kind of move my father said I was incapable of making. I would not just broker the deal. I would be the buyer. I needed a vehicle. I could not buy the shares as Harper Quinn. Dad had right of first refusal clauses that would trigger if a family member tried to move on the stock, or he would simply guilt-trip Martin into blocking it. I needed anonymity. I registered a new entity in Delaware, Coleman Meridian Holdings, LLC. I chose the name Coleman because it sounded old, established, and boring. Exactly the kind of generic corporate moniker that makes people's eyes glaze over. It sounded like a company that made paper clips, not a shell company run by a 20-something branding strategist. 2 days later, I was in a rental car driving through the winding, snow-dusted roads of Vermont. Martin Hale agreed to meet me, not because he knew who I was, but because I had sent him a cold email analyzing the inefficiencies in the Redwood Axis fuel surcharge model. I knew that was his pet peeve. We met at a small diner in Burlington that smelled of maple syrup and bacon grease. Martin did not look like a tycoon. He wore a flannel shirt, a puffy vest, and reading glasses that hung around his neck on a crooked string. He looked like a grandfather who spent his weekends whittling on his porch. He watched me walk in, his eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed spectacles. I was wearing my best serious business coat, but I knew I looked young. I always looked young. "You are the one who sent the email?" Martin asked, as I slid into the booth opposite him. He did not offer a handshake. "You look like you should be in school." "I am Harper," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "And I am not in school. I am in the business of fixing broken companies." Martin stirred his black coffee. "Stonebridge sent you, didn't they? I told those sharks I'm not interested in a leveraged buyout that leaves the company with more debt than revenue. I built that place with Robert's father. I won't see it gutted." "Stonebridge introduced us," I admitted, "but I am not here on their behalf. I am here representing Coleman Meridian Holdings, and more importantly, I am here because I know you have been trying to get Robert to upgrade the fleet tracking system for 5 years, and he keeps telling you it is too expensive." Martin paused, the spoon freezing in his cup. He looked at me sharply. "How do you know that?" "That is private board correspondence." I took a deep breath. This was the gamble. "Because Robert Quinn is my father." Martin sat back, his eyebrows shooting up toward his hairline. He looked at me, really studied my face, searching for the resemblance. Well, I will be damned. You are the younger one, the artist. The strategist, I corrected. And Brightwave Brand Lab isn't an art project. It is a digital restructuring agency. I have increased revenue for 3 of Redwood's direct competitors in the last 12 months. I know this industry, Martin, and I know that my father is running your investment into the ground because he thinks the internet is a fad. Martin let out a short, dry chuckle. He does, doesn't he? Stubborn old mule. I tried to tell him, 10 years ago. I told him, Robert, invest in the software. Robert, look at Amazon. He just laughed. Said trucks drive on pavement, not on the web. I want to buy your shares, Martin, I said. All of them. The amusement faded from his face, replaced by skepticism. With whose money? Robert's? No, I said firmly. My own, and capital I have raised independently. Dad does not know I am here. If he knew, he would be calling you right now to tell you I'm going through a phase. Martin looked out the window at the falling snow. If I sell to you, what happens? You are a kid. No offense. But you are. You walk in there, and Robert will eat you alive. I do not plan to fire him, I said. He is the face of the company. Clients like him. He is good at the handshake deals. But I will restructure the board. I will take the majority vote. I will implement the digital overhaul you have wanted for a decade, and I will keep you on as an honorary advisor so you can watch the stock value go back up before you fully exit. You get your liquidity now, but you keep your legacy. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the sticky table. Here is the projection. Conservative estimates show a 30% increase in EBIT day within 2 years if we modernize the logistics pipeline. If we don't, Redwood files for Chapter 11 in 4 years. Martin put on his glasses. He read the report. He did not skim it. He read every line. He traced the graphs with a calloused finger. He muttered to himself as he looked at the conversion rates I had achieved for my other clients. After 20 minutes of silence, he took off his glasses and looked at me. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. You are not like him, Martin said softly. Robert sees the trucks. You see the map. I see the future, I said, and I want to make sure there is a company left for it. I have one condition, Martin said, his voice hardening. I do not want to see this company flipped. You do not sell it to Stonebridge or anyone else just to make a quick buck. You run it. You fix it. If I find out you are just a front for a liquidation firm, I will haunt you. I am not a front, I said. I am the future CEO. I just have to take the long way around to the chair. Martin nodded. All right, put the paperwork together. Getting Martin's handshake was the easy part. Paying for it was the nightmare. The next 3 weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and terrifying financial maneuvering. I needed a down payment that was substantial enough to secure the financing for the rest. I looked at my small apartment, the one I had finally bought after 2 years of Brightwave's success. It was my only real asset. I walked into the bank and took out a second mortgage, leveraging it to the absolute limit. But it was not enough. I needed more. I called Frank at Miller Machining. We had a long-term retainer contract, a safe, steady income stream. I went to a specialized lender and leveraged the future value of that contract, effectively betting my entire agency's revenue stream on this deal. If Redwood Axis failed, Brightwave would go down with it. I would be destitute. I was still short. I needed another $200,000 to close the gap before the financing deadline. I sat in my office, head in my hands, scrolling through my contacts. I stopped on a name, Elias Thorne. Elias was a freight broker in Chicago I had worked with on a project 6 months ago. He was young, ambitious, and had made a killing in cryptocurrency before pivoting to logistics. He had once told me that he liked betting on underdogs with teeth. I called him. It was 11 at night. Harper, he answered on the second ring. You are calling late. This is either a drunk dial or a business pitch. I am buying my father's company, I said, and I need a silent partner. I pitched him for 10 minutes. I told him everything: the plan, the numbers, the secret holding company, the risk. I told him I was all in, that my apartment and my agency were on the line. "Who else knows?" Elias asked. "Just me, the bank, and Martin Hale," I said. "And my lawyer." "And Robert?" "He thinks I am unemployed." Elias laughed. It was a loud, sharp sound. "I love it. It is Shakespearean. All right, Harper, I am in, but I want preferred shares in Coleman Meridian. If you go public, I want to be first in line to cash out." "Done," I said, my hand trembling as I held the phone. The wire transfer from Chicago hit my escrow account 2 days later. The signing happened in a sterile conference room at a law firm in downtown Burlington. There were no balloons. There was no champagne. There was just a stack of documents 3 inches thick and a lawyer who charged $500 an hour. Martin Hale signed his name with a heavy, scratching fountain pen. He pushed the papers across the mahogany table to me. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line for Coleman Meridian Holdings, LLC. I thought about the dinner table. I thought about Brooke's laugh. I thought about Dad telling me the world needs worker bees. I thought about the thousands of hours I had spent learning code, learning SEO, learning how to make people care about things they could not touch. I signed. "Congratulations, Ms. Quinn," Martin said, standing up and buttoning his coat. "You just bought yourself a very expensive headache." "Thank you, Martin," I said. "I have plenty of aspirin." Martin walked out, ready to retire to his cabin and his wood carving. I sat alone in the conference room. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Mom. "Dinner at the Chop House next week to celebrate Brooke's promotion. Dad says try not to be late this time. Love you." I looked at the message, then down at the wet ink on the share transfer agreement. The lawyer was packing up his briefcase. "Will you be notifying the board immediately?" the lawyer asked. "No," I said, standing up. "Let the paperwork process through the state channels. Let the accountants find it. Let it be a surprise." I walked out of the law firm and into the cold Vermont air. I owned 51% of Redwood Axis. I owned the trucks, the warehouses, the debt, and the logo my father was so proud of. I owned his legacy, and he was currently on a golf course somewhere, probably making a joke about how his youngest daughter was still trying to find herself. He had no idea that I had not only found myself, but I had found him too, and I had the receipt to prove it. While my father was busy polishing the brass on the Titanic, I was quietly arranging the lifeboats. The atmosphere in the Quinn household, or rather, the text messages and phone calls I received from them, painted a picture of a dynasty in its golden age. Dad was talking about expanding the fleet. Brooke was sending photos of office furniture swatches for her new suite. They truly believed Redwood Axis was an unsinkable ship. They did not see the waterline rising in the hold. They did not see the reports I had in front of me, which showed that 3 of their major transport lanes along the I-80 corridor had been operating at a loss for 2 consecutive quarters. I sat in my home office, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the room. On the center screen was a master spreadsheet I had built from scratch. It was a thing of beauty, at least to me. I had color-coded the columns: red for current operational bleed, green for projected revenue under my proposed digital inbound strategy. My father ran his business on outbound sales, cold calls, expensive steak dinners, and golf outings. It was an archaic model. My model was different. I had built a projection based on the data I had gathered from my work with his competitors. If we implemented an automated tracking portal and optimized the company's search engine presence for keywords like refrigerated freight Ohio and last-mile industrial delivery, the customer acquisition cost would drop by 40% in the first 6 months. I wasn't guessing. I had done this before. I had done it for companies that were currently eating Redwood's lunch. A notification chimed on my laptop, pulling me away from the pivot tables. It was an email from my attorney. The subject line was short: "Execution confirmed." I opened it. The body of the email was sparse, professional, and life-changing. "All closing documents with Martin Hale have been countersigned. Funds have been disbursed. Coleman Meridian Holdings, LLC, is now the legal owner of 51% of Redwood Axis Logistics. We are pending only the state filing update, which will process within 24 hours. I leaned back in my chair, letting the breath hiss out of my lungs. It was done. I owned it. I owned the trucks, the debt, the leaking roof at the Toledo terminal, and the arrogant pride of Robert Quinn. Now came the precision strike. I glanced at the calendar. It was the 28th of the month. The end of the fiscal quarter was approaching, which meant the company accountants were in a frenzy preparing the tax capitalization tables. It was the perfect window. If I sent the notification now, it wouldn't just be filed away in a dusty cabinet, it would be scrutinized. I imagined what was happening across town at the Redwood Axis headquarters. I knew the rhythm of that office better than anyone, even though I was rarely invited inside. At this very moment, my father was likely standing in the open plan area, leaning over his assistant's desk. He would be complaining. He always complained when the invoices came in for consulting services. $3,000 for search engine optimization? I could hear his voice in my head, gravelly and dismissive. What are we optimizing? We move boxes. For God's sake, we do not need a computer to tell people we move boxes. He had no idea that the boutique agency charging him that fee was actually subcontracting the work to a freelancer who used my old frameworks. He was paying for my strategies through a middleman, marking it up by 200%, and complaining about the cost while reaping the invisible benefits. And then there was Brooke. I pulled up another document, a feasibility study for the new distribution center in Columbus. Brooke had championed this project. She called it the future of the company. She was currently bragging to anyone who would listen that she was going to manage it. I looked at the numbers on my screen. The location was terrible. It was too far from the rail spur, and the local labor market was oversaturated. Driving up warehouse wages, the study, which I had obtained through Martin Hale's access before the sale, had flagged the site as a high-risk capital drain. Brooke didn't care about capital drain. She cared that the facility was near a high-end shopping district where she liked to have lunch. She was walking into a disaster, and Dad was handing her the keys because she had the right last name. I closed the feasibility study. It was time to stop watching and start directing. I opened a new email draft. I addressed it to Jenkins, the head accountant at Redwood Axis. Jenkins was a nervous man, a stickler for rules who terrified of making a mistake. He was the perfect pawn. Subject: Official Shareholder Registry Update. Urgent. Mr. Jenkins. Please find attached the executed transfer of stock ownership regarding the holdings of Mr. Martin Hale. As of this morning, all shares previously held by Mr. Hale have been acquired by Coleman Meridian Holdings, LLC. Per corporate governance bylaws, please update the capitalization table immediately for the quarterly tax filing. I have also attached the certificate of beneficial ownership, which clarifies the controlling interest behind the LLC. Please confirm receipt and ensure Mr. Robert Quinn is copied on the updated registry, as this materially affects the board structure. Regards. Corporate Secretary, Coleman Meridian Holdings, LLC. I hovered my mouse over the send button. I knew exactly how this would play out. Jenkins would receive the email. He would see the legal letterhead from the prestigious law firm I had hired. He would panic. He would not want to be responsible for hiding a major ownership change from the boss. He would update the Excel file. He would type Coleman Meridian Holdings, LLC into the row where Martin Hale used to be, and then, because he was diligent, he would open the attachment to list the primary beneficiary for tax purposes. He would see my name. Jenkins would stare at it. He would blink behind his thick glasses. He would assume it was a mistake, just like my family always did, but he would not dare delete it. He would send the updated file to Dad with a confused note. The email went out with a soft whoosh sound. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty screen. I felt a strange mixture of triumph and nausea. This wasn't just business anymore. This was a dismantling of my father's reality. I was taking the one thing he loved more than anything, his control, and I was taking it because he had refused to share it. I checked the time. It was 3 in the afternoon. The email would land in Jenkins' inbox in seconds. He would process it within the hour. Dad would get the notification right before he left the office to go home and change for dinner. The dinner. I stood up and walked to the window of my apartment. The city was gray and cold, typical for Cleveland, but I felt a fire burning in my chest. Tonight, I wouldn't just be the daughter who didn't fit in. Tonight, I would be the majority shareholder. I pictured Dad reading the email. I pictured him squinting at the screen, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. I pictured the moment his brain registered the word Coleman and then the word Quinn in the beneficiary column. He would think it was a typo. He would laugh. He would make a joke about it at dinner. He would walk right into the trap I had set, confident in his ignorance, arrogant in his dismissal of me. I went to my closet and pulled out a dress. It was black, sharp, and professional. It was armor. I was not going to dinner to eat steak. I was going to dinner to accept a surrender. I checked my phone one last time. A red receipt popped up. Jenkins had opened the email. The clock had started. I grabbed my purse and keys. I wanted to be there early. I wanted to be sitting at the table, sipping wine. When the realization finally hit him, I wanted to see the exact moment when the phase became the boss. The drive to the chop house was smooth. I didn't listen to music. I listened to the quiet hum of the engine and rehearsed my lines. I knew Brooke would start with a dig about my job. I knew Mom would try to smooth it over with a backhanded compliment. And I knew Dad would be distracted, his mind half on the strange email from accounting, half on the celebration of Brooke's promotion. They were walking into a boardroom meeting, and they didn't even know they needed an agenda. I parked the car and walked toward the restaurant entrance. The valet asked for my keys. "Keep it close," I told him. "I might be leaving in a hurry, or I might be staying all night. It depends on how the meeting goes." He looked confused, but I just smiled. It was the smile of someone who held 51% of the vote. I walked through the heavy wooden doors, the smell of expensive meat and old money hitting me. I saw them. They were already at the table. Dad was laughing at something Brooke said. Mom was adjusting her napkin. They looked like a perfect, happy, successful family. I took a deep breath and walked toward them. The execution was over. The takeover had begun. The waiter poured a third glass of Cabernet for Brooke, filling it to the generous line that signaled we were celebrating. This was not just a Tuesday night dinner anymore. It had been officially christened the Brooke Ascension Party. My sister held the stem of the glass like a scepter. Her face flushed with the intoxication of validation. "The office has a view of the lake," Brooke said, leaning in as if sharing a state secret. "Not the river, the lake. And Dad said I can bring in my own design team to redo the reception area. I want something modern but authoritative. Gray tones, maybe some marble." "Marble is timeless," Mom agreed, nodding vigorously. "It says stability. That is exactly the message a vice president should send." "Exactly," Brooke said. She turned her gaze toward me. It was a benevolent gaze, the kind a queen bestows upon a peasant. And I was thinking, "Harper, once I get settled in, maybe I can throw you a bone. We need someone to manage the company LinkedIn page. It is mostly just posting birthday announcements and truck photos, but it would be steady work for you, better than whatever it is you are doing now, scrounging for small business clients." "That is a lovely idea." "Brooke," Mom chimed in, cutting her steak with precise, surgical movements. "Harper, you really should consider it. Working for the family offers security. You would not have to worry about clients leaving you or chasing down invoices. You could finally relax. Stop pretending to be a CEO and just have a job." The old Harper, the one who existed before this morning, would have shrunk into her chair. She would have smiled a tight, painful smile and mumbled something about appreciating the offer while dying a little inside. But that Harper was gone. She had been bought out along with Martin Hale. I set my fork down. The metal made a deliberate clink against the china. "I appreciate the concern," I said, my voice steady and cool. "But I am not worried about clients leaving. Actually, my retention rate is 98%. Brooke laughed, a short, sharp sound. 98% of what? 3 local bakeries and a dog walker? Harper, be serious. We are talking about enterprise-level operations here, real business. I am talking about enterprise operations too, I said. The table went quiet. It was not a heavy silence, just a confused one. They were not used to me pushing back. For example, I continued, keeping my eyes on my father. I just finished a 6-month restructuring for a distributor in Indiana. They were bleeding cash on outbound sales calls that went nowhere. I implemented a digital inbound pipeline for them, automated lead qualification, SEO targeting for heavy machinery parts. In the last quarter alone, their revenue increased by $1.2 million. Dad stopped chewing. He looked at me, his brows knitting together. He looked like he was trying to solve a math problem in his head. 1.2 million? Dad asked. In a quarter? Yes, I said, and their customer acquisition costs dropped by 40%. Who is the distributor? Dad asked. His tone was not proud. It was suspicious. He was testing me. He thought I was lying. Kavanaugh Heavy Industries, I said. Dad froze. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. I watched the recognition hit him like a physical blow. Kavanaugh was the white whale. Redwood Axis had spent 3 years trying to land their shipping contract. They had wined and dined the CEO, sent gift baskets, and offered discounts. They had lost the bid 6 months ago to a competitor who had a better digital tracking system. You worked with Kavanaugh? Dad asked, his voice low. Jim Kavanaugh does not hire freelancers. He is the most old-school son of a bitch in the Midwest. He is, I agreed, but he likes money, and when I showed him how much he was losing by ignoring his digital footprint, he hired me, and now he is making more money than he has in 10 years. A shadow passed over Dad's face. It was a complex mix of emotions. There was shock, certainly, but beneath it was a simmering irritation. He did not like that I knew a name he respected. He did not like that I had succeeded in a room where he had failed. To him, my success felt like an insubordination. Well, Mom said, sensing the tension and trying to smother it with politeness. That is nice, Harper, but surely that is a fluke. One lucky contract does not make a career. You cannot rely on lightning striking twice. It is not lightning, Mom, I said. It is a system. I have done the same thing for 3 other logistics firms this year. Logistics? Brooke scoffed, rolling her eyes. Since when do you care about logistics? You used to cry when Dad tried to explain supply chains to us at breakfast. I care about efficiency, I said. And frankly, this industry is full of dinosaurs waiting for a meteor. It is easy money if you know where to look. Dad bristled. I had used a word he hated, dinosaurs. He took a long drink of his scotch. Careful. Harper, Dad warned. You are talking about men who built this country. You think because you can make a computer beep you know how to move steel across state lines? Don't get arrogant. You are still playing in a sandbox. Maybe, I said, but my sandbox is profitable. Brooke laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. She turned to her father, desperate to reclaim the spotlight. Oh, ignore her. Dad, she is just trying to sound important because I am getting the VP title. Chris told me about this type of thing. He says digital consultants are just modern snake oil salesmen. They sell you pretty charts and vanity metrics, but it never translates to the bottom line. It is a game of smoke and mirrors. I looked at Brooke. She was so confident in her ignorance. She was quoting Chris, some middle management boyfriend or colleague, as if he were an oracle. She was insulting my profession, my expertise, and my life's work, all to soothe her own insecurity. Is that what Chris says? I asked. Does Chris know that without those vanity metrics, Kavanaugh would have laid off 50 workers this Christmas? Because that is what the data saved. 50 jobs, real people, real paychecks. Brooke's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She wasn't used to me having ammunition. Dad cleared his throat loudly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. The screen lit up his face, highlighting the deep lines etched into his forehead. Speaking of numbers, Dad grumbled, I still have to deal with this mess from Jenkins. I do not know what he is drinking over there in accounting, but he sent another email while we were ordering dessert, marked urgent. My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. What does it say? Mom asked, looking concerned. Is it an audit? No, Dad said, tapping the screen with a thick finger. It is that shareholder registry again. He insists it is correct, says the legal documents are on file. He even copied me on the confirmation. He shook his head, looking more annoyed than worried. I will have to go down there tomorrow and tear him a new one. I cannot have mistakes like that in the permanent record. He looked up at me. His eyes were dark, searching. For a second, just a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt. Harper, he said, you are sure you didn't do something stupid? You know how these identity theft rings work. Maybe someone used your name to set up a shell company, Coleman Meridian Holdings? Does that sound familiar to you? It sounds like a holding company. Dad, I said calmly. Jenkins says the beneficiary is listed as Harper Quinn, Dad said, his voice tightening. Now, I know you do not have the capital to buy a ham sandwich, let alone a controlling stake in my company. So what is going on? Did you sign something you shouldn't have? Did some boyfriend ask to borrow your social security number? Brooke gasped. The drama was too delicious for her to resist. She leaned forward, her eyes wide with faux concern. Oh my God, Brooke whispered. Harper, did you get in trouble? Is that it? Are you in debt? Did you get involved with loan sharks or something? Is that why your name is on the tax forms? Are they trying to garnish Dad's company to pay your bills? Brooke, stop, Mom said, but she looked terrified. Harper, tell us the truth. If you are in trouble, we can call the family lawyer. We can fix it. Just do not lie to us. I looked around the table. They had constructed an entire narrative in seconds. In their minds, I was either a victim of identity theft or a criminal in debt. The idea that I could be a powerhouse investor was so foreign to their worldview that they literally could not conceive of it. It was easier for them to believe I was a felon than a success. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same calm I felt when I negotiated the deal with Martin Hale. It was the calm of knowing you have the winning hand. I am not in debt, Brooke, I said, and nobody stole my identity. Then why is your name on my company's books? Dad demanded. His voice was rising now, attracting looks from nearby tables. Why is Jenkins telling me you are a beneficiary? I picked up my napkin and folded it neatly on the table. I smoothed out the creases. Because Jenkins is good at his job, I said. Dad stared at me. What is that supposed to mean? It means you should read the attachment. Dad, I said. Not just the subject line. Read the documents. Read the transfer agreement. Read the signature at the bottom of the page where Martin Hale signed over his 49%. Martin would never sell, Dad snapped. He is loyal. Martin wanted to retire, I corrected. And he wanted to make sure the company wasn't sold to a vulture fund that would strip it for parts. He wanted to sell to someone who understood the business. And he sold to a shell company? Dad asked, baffled. He sold to Coleman Meridian Holdings, I said, which is fully owned and operated by me. Silence slammed into the table. It was heavier than before. This wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a bomb that had just landed but hadn't detonated yet. Brooke let out a nervous giggle. Okay, Harper, very funny. You bought Martin's shares? With what? Monopoly money? With the profits from my agency, I said, my voice hard as steel. And with financing secured by the contracts I won, the contracts you laughed at. I looked at my father. He wasn't laughing. He was looking at me like he had never seen me before. He was looking at me like a stranger who had just walked into his house and put her feet on his coffee table. You are lying, Dad whispered, but there was no conviction in it. He was beginning to do the math. The weird name on the logs, the Kavanaugh contract, my confidence. The pieces were clicking into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying him. Read the email, Dad, I said softly. Tonight, when you get home, Read every word. Look at the timestamps. Look at the state filings. Harper, Mom said, her voice trembling. What have you done? I secured the family legacy, Mom, I said. Since nobody else was going to do it. I looked at Brooke. The smirk was gone. She looked small. She looked like a vice president of internal operations who just realized her promotion papers might not be worth the paper they were printed on. Lies, Brooke spat out, though her voice wavered. Dad, tell her to stop lying. Dad didn't speak. He was staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over the attachment icon. He was afraid to press it. He knew that once he opened that file, the world he ruled was over. I am not asking for your permission anymore. Dad, I said, and I am not asking for a job. I am telling you that tomorrow morning, things are going to be different. Laughter is over. Business begins. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait for the check. I turned and walked away, feeling their eyes burning into my back. I left them in the wreckage of their own assumptions. 3 people sitting around a table with a ghost. Behind me, I heard the faint digital ping of an attachment opening on a smartphone. I did not turn on the lights. I walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the sofa, the darkness of the room wrapping around me like a cold blanket. Outside the window, the city of Cleveland hummed, sirens in the distance, the tires of cars on wet pavement, the low drone of an industrial town trying to sleep. I placed my phone on the coffee table. The screen was black. I stared at it. I knew exactly what was happening on the other side of town. Dad was in his study now. He had poured himself a drink, probably a double scotch. Neat. He was sitting in his leather chair, the one he claimed was for thinking, holding his iPad with shaking hands. He was reading the document Jenkins had sent. He was reading the articles of incorporation for Coleman Meridian Holdings. He was seeing the signature line. He was seeing the notary stamp. He was realizing that the phase he had mocked had just bought his mortgage. It took 40 minutes. The phone vibrated against the wood of the table, a harsh buzzing sound that made me jump even though I was expecting it. The screen lit up. Dad. Then a text message appeared, floating over the caller ID. Call me, now. I did not pick up immediately. I let it ring 3 times. I took a breath, expanding my lungs until they pressed against my ribs, and then exhaled slowly. I picked up the phone. Hello, Dad, I said. My voice was steady. It sounded nothing like the girl who used to beg for approval at the dinner table. What is this? Robert Quinn's voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the booming baritone of the boardroom dictator. It was tight, high-pitched, and laced with a panic he was struggling to strangle. I am looking at a document. Harper, Jenkins sent me a document. Why is your name on the shareholder control list? What the hell is Coleman Meridian Holdings? Coleman Meridian Holdings is a Delaware-based limited liability company, I recited, my tone professional, bordering on detached. It specializes in the acquisition and restructuring of distressed industrial assets. I am the sole managing member. Distressed? Dad choked on the word. You call my company distressed? I call a company with flat revenues and a reliance on outbound sales in a digital economy distressed, I said. And more importantly, I call a company whose minority shareholder was desperate to exit distressed. Martin, Dad whispered. The name came out like a curse. You talked to Martin. I bought Martin, I corrected him. I bought his entire position, 49% of the outstanding shares, plus the 2% voting proxy he held from grandfather's original trust. That gives me 51% control. Dad. You went behind my back, he roared. The shock was giving way to anger now, the familiar rage of a man who feels his authority slipping. You went to my partner. You went to my oldest friend and you manipulated him. You played games. Harper, this is family business. You do not go behind your father's back and buy stock like some corporate raider. I did not manipulate anyone, I said, leaning back into the sofa cushions. Martin wanted to sell. He has wanted to sell for 3 years. You just never listened to him because you were too busy telling him his ideas about automation were stupid. You called him a coward, remember? You told me at Christmas that Martin was a timid old man afraid of change. Well, that timid old man just made a very bold business decision. He betrayed me, Dad spat. And so did you. This is insider trading. You used family dinners to get information. You used your access to this house to spy on me. Stop, I said. The word was sharp, cutting through his tirade. Do not use legal terms you do not understand. Dad, it is not insider trading. Every piece of information I used to value the company came from public filings, industry trend reports, and the due diligence documents Martin provided to my lawyers. I did not use a single secret. I used the market. You lied, he shouted. You sat at dinner tonight and let me laugh at you. I sat at dinner and told you the truth, I said. I told you I was handling enterprise clients. I told you I had a 98% retention rate. I told you I saved Kavanaugh's business. You were the one who chose to hear unemployed daughter instead of successful strategist. That is not deception. Dad, that is your own bias. There was a crashing sound on the other end of the line, like a glass being slammed down onto a desk. You cannot own this company, Robert said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. I have right of first refusal. It is in the bylaws. If Martin wanted to sell, he had to offer it to me first. Any transfer of stock to an outside entity requires the CEO's signature. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. This was the checkmate. You are right, I said softly. He did have to offer it to you, and he did. 3 months ago, Martin sent a formal notice of intent to sell to a private investment group. He sent the waiver to your office. You signed it. Dad. I never signed anything for you. No, I said. You signed a waiver for Coleman Meridian Holdings. Martin told you he found a young, passive investor group that wanted to park some capital and wouldn't interfere with operations. He told you they were harmless. You were so happy to keep Martin from selling to a competitor that you didn't even run a background check on the LLC. You just wanted him gone so you could stop hearing about software upgrades. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. I could hear his breathing, ragged and heavy. I could picture him scrambling through his mental files. Remembering the day Martin came into his office with a stack of papers, Dad probably signed them between golf swings, laughing about how he was finally getting the old man off his back. He had signed his own warrant. You, Dad's voice trembled. You tricked me. I counted on you being you, I said. I counted on you being so arrogant that you wouldn't believe a young investor could be a threat. I counted on you not reading the fine print because you think you are smarter than the lawyers. You always tell us to read the contract. Dad, why didn't you? I am your father, he said. The anger was draining away, replaced by something far more pathetic. Betrayal. I raised you. I paid for your college. I put food on your table. And this is how you repay me? By stealing my life's work? I am not stealing it, I said, and for the first time, my voice cracked with the emotion I had been holding back. I am saving it. Brooke was going to drive Redwood Axis into the ground within 2 years. You were going to let her do it because she looks the part. You were going to let the legacy die because you were too stubborn to modernize. I bought the company to keep it alive. You did it to hurt me, he said. I did it so you would finally see me, I whispered. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and painful. It was the truth. Yes, it was business. Yes, it was about money and strategy. But beneath the spreadsheets and the LLCs, it was the desperate act of a daughter screaming for her father to look at her and see something other than a disappointment. If I had come to you, I continued, my voice gaining strength, if I had walked into your office and asked to buy in, what would you have said? Be honest, Dad, if I showed you the same plan, the same money, but asked for your permission, what would you have done? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew. He would have patted me on the head. He would have told me it was cute. He would have told me to go play with my computer while the men did the work. He would have blocked me at every turn. Not because the plan was bad, but because I was Harper. You gave me no choice, I said. I had to become your boss to become your equal. My boss, he repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. You think you are my boss now? I own 51% of the voting stock, I said. Technically, I am the chairwoman of the board, so, yes, I am. I heard a heavy sigh, a sound of defeat that rattled through the phone lines. It was the sound of a king realizing his castle had been built on sand. Brooke doesn't know, Dad said. It wasn't a question. No, I said. Only you, me, Martin, and the lawyers. If she finds out, Dad trailed off. If the employees find out that my own daughter had to hostile take over her way into the building, do you know what that makes me look like? It makes you look like a man who raised a very smart daughter, I said. Or it makes you look like a fool who lost his company. How the story gets told is up to you. Dad. He paused. I could hear the gears turning in his head. Robert Quinn was a survivor. He was already calculating how to spin this. He was already thinking about damage control. He wasn't thinking about hugging me. He was thinking about his reputation. Tomorrow, he said. His voice was low, almost a whisper. You come to the office, 8 a.m, before the staff gets in, before Brooke arrives. I will be there, I said. We need to talk about structure, he said, his voice firming up, trying to regain some semblance of command. We need to talk about how we present this. We cannot let the industry think there is a civil war at Redwood Axis. The stock is private, but the rumors will kill our credit rating. I agree, I said. We present a united front, strategic partnership. Strategic partnership, he echoed. He sounded like he was choking on the phrase. My God, Harper, you really did it. Yes, Dad, I did. Do not be late, he said, falling back into his old habit of giving orders. And wear something professional, not those freelancer clothes. I will wear the suit of the majority shareholder, I said. He hung up. I lowered the phone from my ear. The screen went dark. I sat in the silence of my apartment, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had won. I had forced him to acknowledge me. I had forced him to invite me to the table. But as I sat there in the dark, staring at the lights of the city, I didn't feel the rush of joy I had expected. I felt a profound, aching exhaustion. I had won the company, but I had broken the family. The dinner table would never be the same. Brooke would never forgive me. Mom would be caught in the crossfire. I pulled my knees up to my chest and wrapped my arms around them. A single tear leaked out and tracked down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. I didn't have time for tears. I had a board meeting in 7 hours. The automatic glass doors of the Redwood Axis headquarters hissed open, a sound I had heard 1,000 times before. Usually, it was the soundtrack to a dutiful daughter dropping off a forgotten briefcase or delivering a foil-wrapped tray of cookies for the office holiday party. Today, it sounded like the breach of a fortress. I walked into the lobby. The air smelled the same, a mix of industrial floor wax, stale coffee, and the faint, metallic scent of the rail yard down the street. But the ground beneath my feet felt different. Yesterday, I was a guest walking on my father's carpet. Today, I was the landlord checking the foundation. Sarah, the receptionist who had been with the company since I was in middle school, looked up from her computer. She smiled, the kind of polite, dismissive smile reserved for family members who had no real business being there. Hi, Harper, she said, reaching for the visitor log. Here to see your dad? He is in a meeting, but I can let him know you are waiting. Did you bring lunch? I stopped at the desk. I did not reach for the pen to sign the visitor log. I am not here to bring lunch. Sarah, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the bubbly apology I usually offered for interrupting. I am here for the 9 o'clock meeting with Robert and Brooke. Sarah blinked. Her hand hovered over the phone. The 9 o'clock? That is the executive strategy session. It is closed door. I know, I said. Please let them know the majority shareholder has arrived. Sarah's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked at me, really looked at me, Searching for the punchline, she saw the tailored black suit, the leather portfolio tucked under my arm, and the steel in my eyes. The confusion in her face curdled into something else, curiosity mixed with a sudden, instinctive fear. She realized the hierarchy she had memorized for 20 years had just shifted, even if she did not understand how. I will let him know, she stammered, picking up the receiver. Thank you, I said. I did not wait for her to buzz me in. I walked past the desk and pushed through the double doors leading to the executive wing. The hallway was a shrine to Robert Quinn. On the left wall hung a series of framed photographs documenting the history of Redwood Axis. There was Dad in the 80s, standing next to his first truck, wearing a denim jacket and a smile full of hunger. There was Dad cutting the ribbon on the Toledo Distribution Center. There was Dad shaking hands with the mayor. And at the end of the hall, the largest frame held the family portrait from the company's 20th anniversary gala. I stopped for a second to look at it. Dad and Mom were in the center, beaming. Brooke was right next to Dad, her hand on his shoulder, radiant in a red dress, looking every inch the heir apparent. And there I was, squeezed into the far right edge of the frame, half of my arm cut off by the matting. I looked uncomfortable, like I was trying not to take up too much space. I reached out and touched the glass over my own face. Not anymore, I whispered. I turned and walked toward the small conference room at the end of the hall. The door was closed. I could hear muffled voices inside, Brooke's shrill tone rising and falling. I gripped the handle of the door. The metal was cold. I turned it and stepped inside. The conversation cut off instantly. The room was small, designed for intimate power plays. Robert was standing by the window, his back to the room, looking out at the gray parking lot. Brooke was sitting at the head of the oval table, her face blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed but furious. On the table between them sat a single piece of paper. It was the email I had sent to Jenkins. The words, Quinn Meridian Holdings, LLC, had been circled in angry red ink. The lines dug so deep into the paper they had probably scarred the mahogany underneath. You, Brooke hissed. She didn't stand up. She looked like she was vibrating with the effort to stay in her chair. You actually showed up. Dad asked me to come, I said, closing the door behind me. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I cannot believe you have the nerve, Brooke spat out. Is this a joke, Harper? Is this some sick prank you and your little internet friends cooked up? Hacking the company registry? Jenkins is crying in his office because of you. Jenkins is crying because he realized he missed a material change in ownership for 3 months, I said, walking to the other end of the table. I did not sit. I placed my laptop bag on the table and unzipped it. He is worried about his job. He should be. Dad turned away from the window. He looked tired. The lines around his mouth were deeper than they had been at dinner. He looked at me with a mixture of wariness and resignation. Sit down, Harper, Dad said. His voice was rough. I will stand for a moment, I said. Sit down. Brooke slammed her hand on the table. Stop acting like you belong here. You are not an executive. You are a consultant who got lucky with a few contracts. You do not own this place. Actually, I said, reaching into my bag. I do. I pulled out the thick stack of documents. These weren't the digital copies or the emails. These were the originals, the heavy bond paper, the wet signatures, the embossed gold seal of the state of Delaware, and the notarized transfer agreement from Vermont. I slid the stack down the center of the table. It glided over the polished wood and came to a rest right in front of Brooke. Read it, I said. Page 4, paragraph 2, assignment of interest. Brooke stared at the papers like they were radioactive. She refused to touch them. Dad walked over, his heavy steps thudding on the carpet. He reached out and flipped the document open. He read in silence. The only sound in the room was the hum of the HVAC system and Brooke's jagged breathing. Martin Hale, Dad read aloud, his voice flat. Hereby transfers 100% of his Class A and Class B shares to Coleman Meridian Holdings, LLC. And the next page, I directed, the certificate of formation for Coleman Meridian. Dad turned the page. Soul member? Harper Quinn. He looked up at me. It is real. Of course it is real, I said. I mortgaged my apartment. I leveraged my agency. I signed a promissory note that will bankrupt me if this company does not hit its performance targets in 2 years. I put everything I have on the table. Dad, this is not a prank. This is a takeover. Why? Brooke screamed. She finally stood up, knocking her chair back against the wall. Why would you do this? To humiliate me? Because you are jealous? I have worked here for 5 years. Harper, 5 years. I started in dispatch. I worked my way up. I earned this promotion. And you just swoop in with a checkbook? I did not swoop in, I said, keeping my voice level to contrast with her hysteria. I saw an opportunity that you missed. I saw that Martin was looking for an exit strategy, and I knew Dad would never buy him out because of the debt load. If I hadn't bought those shares, Stonebridge Capital would have. And if Stonebridge owned this company, Brooke, you wouldn't be getting a promotion. You would be getting a severance package. Don't act like you did this for me, Brooke yelled. You did this to steal my spot. You want to be the boss? You cannot even handle a family dinner without getting your feelings hurt. I did not do it for you, I admitted cold and sharp. I did it for the asset. This company is undervalued. It is run inefficiently. It is bleeding money on routes that should be automated. I bought it because I know how to fix it. Fix it? Dad repeated. He sounded offended. I built this company from one truck. Harper, it does not need fixing. It does, I said, looking him in the eye. You lost the Kavanaugh contract. You lost the Miller account. You are losing market share to tech-forward logistics firms every single quarter. You are running a 1990s business in a 2025 world. You built a great foundation, Dad, but the house is crumbling. I have put my blood into this place, Brooke shouted, tears finally spilling over. I am here every morning at 7. I stay until 7 at night. I manage the drivers. I deal with the unions. That is sweat equity. Harper, that has to count for something. You cannot just buy authority. I looked at my sister. For the first time, I didn't see the perfect golden child. I saw a terrified woman who realized her entire identity was tied to a title her father had given her. Sweat equity is valuable. Brooke, I said softer now. And I am not firing you. I need people who know the drivers. I need people who know the unions. Your work has value. I paused, letting the next words gather weight. But sweat equity is not equity, I said. Ownership is capital. Ownership is risk. You showed up to work, yes, but you took a salary. You drove a company car. You took zero risk. I put my name on a loan that could ruin me. That is the difference. I paid the price of admission. You were waiting for a ticket to be handed to you. Brooke gasped, looking at Dad for support. Dad, are you going to let her talk to me like that? Tell her she cannot just walk in here and take over. Dad was still looking at the papers. He traced the signature of Martin Hale with his thumb. He looked like a man mourning a death. Robert? Brooke pleaded. Say something. Dad closed the folder. He took a deep breath and looked at Brooke, then at me. She is right, Brooke, Dad said. Brooke recoiled as if he had slapped her. What? The law is the law, Dad said, his voice heavy. Martin sold his shares. It was his right to sell. Harper bought them. It was her right to buy. She holds 51% of the voting stock. That makes her the majority shareholder. But you are the CEO, Brooke stammered. You run the company. I serve at the pleasure of the board, Dad said, reciting the corporate governance rule he had likely ignored for decades. And she is the board now. He looked at me. There was no warmth in his eyes, but there was a new glint. It was the cold, hard assessment of a businessman looking at a rival. So, Dad said, leaning his hands on the table, you have the keys, you have the papers, you have the 51%. Congratulations. Harper, you are the captain. He gestured around the small, stifling room. Now what? Dad asked. Are you going to fire me? Are you going to fire your sister? Are you going to sell the trucks and turn us into an app? No, I said. I am not here to burn it down. I am here to modernize it. Modernize, Dad scoffed. That is a fancy word for telling me I am old. It is a word for survival, I said. The question isn't whether you accept this. The papers are signed. The state has recorded it. The reality is already here. The question is what we do next. Do we walk out of this room as a family that is restructuring for growth? Or do we walk out of here as a disaster that the industry will gossip about for the next 10 years? I looked at Brooke, who was wiping her eyes, her face a mask of sullen fury. I looked at Dad, who was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. The choice is yours, I said. I have a plan to double our EBITDA in 24 months. I want you both to be part of it, but make no mistake, it is my plan, and we are going to execute it my way. The silence stretched out, thin and brittle. Outside the window, a truck horn blared, a reminder of the business that was churning along, oblivious to the coup taking place in the executive suite. Dad stood up straight. He buttoned his suit jacket. It was an unconscious gesture, armor for the defeated. Okay, Dad said. Let's hear the plan. I connected my laptop to the conference room screen, the HDMI cable clicking into place with a sound that felt final. The projector hummed to life, casting a stark white rectangle onto the wall, obliterating the shadow where my father usually stood to give his speeches. This is not a presentation about changing the logo, I said, opening the first slide. This is a presentation about why we are dying. The screen filled with a graph. It was ugly. A red line trended downward, jagged and steep, representing Redwood Axis's market share over the last 5 years. We have lost 15% of our mid-sized manufacturing clients since 2021, I said, pointing to the dip. Why? Not because our trucks are slow, not because our drivers are rude, but because our competitors offer real-time GPS tracking accessible via a mobile app, and we offer a phone number that goes to voicemail after 5 p.m. I clicked to the next slide. It showed a side-by-side comparison. On the left was Redwood Axis, stagnant revenue, high churn rate. On the right was Client X, a smaller logistics firm based in Columbus. Their revenue line was a hockey stick, shooting upward. This company on the right, I said, looking at Dad. They are smaller than us. Their fleet is half the size, but their operating margin is double ours. Why? Because they automated their booking system. They optimized their SEO for expedited freight Ohio. They use a CRM that predicts when a client will need a shipment before the client even calls. Dad squinted at the screen. That is Miller's outfit. Frank Miller. I know him. He is a small-timer. He was a small-timer, I corrected. Now he's eating your lunch on the I-71 corridor, and the reason he is doing it is because I designed that strategy for him. Dad looked from the screen to me. You built that? I did, I said. And I can build it here, but only if we stop pretending that business is done on the golf course. I clicked again. The next slide was titled Strategic Realignment. It detailed a new organizational chart. It wasn't radical, but it was surgical. I am not asking for your office, Dad, I said. You are the CEO. The clients know you. The unions respect you. You are the face of Redwood Axis, and that has value. I want you to stay exactly where you are. Dad's shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. He had expected me to demand his resignation. However, I continued, we are creating a new division, digital transformation and growth. I will lead it as Chief Strategy Officer, and in this division, I have veto power. If marketing wants to spend $50,000 on a billboard, I can say no. If IT wants to buy servers we do not need, I can say no. Any capital expenditure related to technology or customer acquisition goes through me. I turned to Brooke. She was staring at the screen, her arms crossed tight across her chest, waiting for the axe to fall. Brooke, I said, you are not going to run the new distribution center. I knew it, she snapped. You are pushing me out. No, I said. I am saving you from a disaster. That center is a money pit. The location is wrong, and the labor model is flawed. If you take that job, you will fail, and it won't be your fault. It will be the math. I brought up a slide with Brooke's name on it. Underneath, it said VP of Fleet Optimization. You are good at logistics, Brooke, I said. You know the routes better than anyone. You know which drivers are stealing fuel and which ones are honest. I want you to focus purely on the physical network, optimizing routes, reducing deadhead miles, negotiating fuel contracts. That is where you actually add value. It is real work, not just a vanity title to make Dad happy. Brooke blinked. She looked at the screen, then at me. She was expecting humiliation. Instead, she was getting a job description that actually matched her skills. It was less glamorous than head of expansion, but it was real. You want me to manage the trucks? Brooke asked. I want you to make the trucks profitable, I said, because right now, they are burning cash. I shut the laptop. The fan whirred into silence. I have 51%, I said, addressing the room. I could fire you both. I could sell the assets to Stonebridge tomorrow and walk away with a check that would let me retire at 26. I could bring in a private equity team to strip this place to the copper wiring. I walked over to the window and looked out at the fleet of red trucks parked in the lot. But I do not want to do that, I said. I want to prove that this company can work. I want to prove that I can fix it without destroying it. I want to prove that the dreamer was the only one who was actually awake. Dad was silent for a long time. He walked over to the timeline on the wall, the photos of him in the 80s. He touched the frame of the first truck he ever bought. This looks like Martin's old plan, Dad said softly. The tracking, the automation. He sent me a memo like this 5 years ago. I know, I said. I read it in the due diligence files. You threw it in the trash. I thought it was too expensive, Dad muttered. I thought we were doing fine. We were slowly suffocating, I said. Dad turned around. He looked at me, and for the first time, the look wasn't patronizing, it was appraising. He was looking at me like a partner he didn't quite trust yet, but had to respect. You are not doing this to get back at me, Dad said. It was half a question, half a realization. You could have humiliated me today. You could have kicked me out of my own building. Revenge is expensive, Dad, I said. Profit is better. I am not here to settle scores. I am here to secure the asset. Brooke spoke up, her voice quiet but steady. If you knew all this, if you could fix it, why didn't you just tell us? Why did you have to go nuclear and buy the company? Because you wouldn't have listened, I said simply. If I had come to you with a slide deck last week, would you have looked at it? Or would you have told me to go help with the lunch order? Brooke looked down at her hands. She didn't answer. I needed leverage, I said. I needed a piece of paper that said you couldn't ignore me. I needed ownership. Dad walked back to the table. He placed his hands on the back of his leather chair, the CEO's chair. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at me. And if I say no? Dad asked. If I refuse to work with this structure? If I refuse to let my daughter veto my decisions? I didn't flinch. Then, as the majority shareholder, I said, I will be forced to accept the resignation of the CEO. I will hire an external executive to run the day-to-day, someone from Chicago or New York, someone who doesn't care about your legacy or your employees. But I am giving you the first choice. Dad, you can stay and build this with me, or you can leave and watch me build it with a stranger. The air in the room was thick. This was the precipice. Robert Quinn had never backed down from a fight in his life, but he also knew how to count. He knew the votes. He knew the law. He looked at the family photo on the wall, the one where I was pushed to the edge. He looked at Brooke, who seemed small and defeated. He looked at the red circle on the paper, Coleman Meridian Holdings. He nodded, a slow, heavy nod. All right, Dad said. We play by your rules. We try the digital strategy. We restructure. He pointed a finger at me, the old authority flaring up for a second. But if this fails, he said, his voice hard, If these computers of yours don't deliver, if we lose money, you are the one who has to stand in front of the employees and explain why. You are the one who has to tell the family we are broke. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said without hesitation. "I am betting my own money on this. Dad, if we sink, I drown first." Dad let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since last night. "Okay," he said. "Strategic realignment. Let's get to work." He sat down in his chair, but for the first time in the history of Redwood Axis, he didn't look like the king. He looked like a man sharing the throne. "Brooke," Dad said, "get the fleet efficiency reports. Harper wants to see the deadhead numbers." Brooke hesitated, then stood up. She looked at me, a complicated mix of resentment and grudging acceptance in her eyes. "I will get the files," Brooke said. I watched them. The dynamic had shifted. The tectonic plates of the family had realigned. I hadn't destroyed them. I had just forced them to move into the 21st century. I sat down at the table, opposite my father. I opened my laptop again. "First item on the agenda," I said. "We are canceling the billboard contract." Dad winced, but he didn't argue. "Fine," he grunted. "Cancel the damn billboards." I smiled. It was the first honest smile I had felt in this building in years. "Good," I said. "Now let's look at the cash flow." The gossip moved faster than the fiber optic cables I was threatening to install. By 10 in the morning, the entire administrative floor knew. I could feel it in the way the air shifted when I walked past the cubicles. For years, I had been the punchline of the office holiday party. The artsy daughter, the one who played with computers, the one who showed up to borrow the copier for her little projects. Now, heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes followed me not with amusement, but with the terrified respect reserved for the person who signs the checks. My temporary office was a conference room near the back, but the door was open. That was how Mr. Alvarez found me. Luis Alvarez was the operations manager for the Midwest Fleet. He had been with Redwood Axis for 20 years, a man with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints and a skepticism of anything that didn't run on diesel. I expected him to quit. I expected him to throw his hard hat on the table and tell me he wouldn't take orders from a girl he used to bounce on his knee. Instead, he closed the door quietly behind him. "Ms. Quinn," he said. He didn't call me Harper. That was the first shift. "Mr. Alvarez," I replied, looking up from the fleet manifests. "If you are here to resign, I would ask you to give me 2 weeks. I need your knowledge of the union contracts." He shook his head, twisting his cap in his hands. "I am not quitting. I just wanted to say, I saw the memo, the one about the digital tracking and the automated dispatch." "I know it is a lot of change," I said, preparing my defense, "but it is necessary." "I know it is necessary," Alvarez said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I proposed the same system 3 years ago." I froze. "You did?" "I didn't have the fancy slides," Alvarez admitted. "But I told them. I told Brooke. I said the drivers were spending too much time on the phone checking in. I found a vendor who could install GPS units for a fraction of the cost we are paying in overtime. I put the proposal on her desk." "And what happened?" I asked, though a cold feeling in my stomach told me I already knew the answer. "She shredded it," Alvarez said. His jaw tightened. "She told me that technology is not our culture. She said if she couldn't explain it to your father in 2 minutes, it wasn't worth doing. But that wasn't the real reason. I could tell. She didn't understand it. Harper. And because she didn't understand it, she didn't want it in her department. She was afraid she would look stupid if she had to manage something she couldn't control." I leaned back in my chair. For years, I had blamed my father's stubbornness. I thought he was the wall I was banging my head against. But now I realized there was another gatekeeper. Brooke hadn't just been passively benefiting from nepotism. She had been actively suffocating innovation to protect her own ego. She would rather let the company bleed money than admit there was a part of the business she didn't master. "Thank you for telling me, Luis," I said. "From now on, your proposals come directly to me." He nodded, put his cap back on, and walked out. He looked lighter. I felt heavier. The weight followed me to dinner 3 nights later. It was a mandatory family gathering at my parents' house. The dynamic had shifted so violently that the very architecture of the room felt different. The dining table, usually a place of boisterous laughter and my father's storytelling, felt like a negotiation table in a hostile territory. Mom had cooked a roast, her comfort food for crises. Dad sat at the head of the table, cutting his meat with aggressive precision. Brooke sat opposite me, pushing peas around her plate, her eyes swollen. She looked like a deposed queen. "So," Brooke broke the silence. Her voice was brittle. "I hear you are already meeting with the software vendors. Fast work." "We are behind schedule," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Every day we wait is another day we lose market share." "You must feel very proud of yourself," Brooke sneered. "Walking around the office like you built the place, everyone is terrified of you. You know, they think you're going to replace them all with robots. They are terrified because for 10 years, leadership has told them that change is the enemy," I said. "I am teaching them that change is survival." "It should have been me," Brooke said. The words tumbled out, raw and ugly. Dad stopped chewing. Mom put down her fork. "Excuse me?" I asked. "The shares," Brooke said, looking at Dad. "If Martin wanted to sell, you should have told me. Dad, I had some savings. I could have taken a loan. We could have kept it in the real family. You should have given me the chance to buy him out." "You didn't have the capital, Brooke," Dad grunted. "And you didn't have the credit rating." "I would have found it," Brooke shouted. "If I knew the company was at risk, I would have found a way. But you let her do it. You let her sneak in." "I didn't sneak," I said. "I walked through the front door with a check." "It is cruel," Mom interjected suddenly. Her voice was high and trembling. She looked at me with wet eyes. "That is what it is. Harper, it is cruel. You have humiliated your father. You have turned him into an employee in his own company. You sit there at his desk. You veto his decisions. How can you sleep at night knowing you have stripped him of his dignity?" "I haven't stripped him of anything," I said, my grip tightening on my steak knife. "He is still the CEO. He still holds the gavel. He still gets the corner office. The only difference is that now, when he looks at the shareholder list, he has to read my name in the same column as his. Is that what is so humiliating, Mom? That I am his equal?" "You are not his equal," Mom snapped, shocking us all. "He built that company from nothing. You just manipulated a bank and an old man." "I saved the company," I shot back. "Ask Mr. Alvarez. Ask the accountants. We were bleeding out. If I hadn't stepped in, Dad would have been forced to sell to Stonebridge within 18 months, and then he wouldn't be an employee. He would be retired, and you would be wondering where the dividend checks went." "I had a plan," Dad said quietly. We all turned to him. He hadn't looked up from his plate. "I had a plan for the succession," Dad said. "I was working on it with the estate lawyers last month." "See?" Brooke said triumphantly. "He had a plan." "I was going to set up a trust," Dad continued, his voice heavy with a confession that had been festering. "I was going to transfer the majority voting rights to Brooke over the next 5 years. She knows the operations. She knows the people." He finally looked up at me. His eyes were sad, but not apologetic. "And for you, Harper, I was setting up a guaranteed income annuity, a passive trust. You would have received a monthly check. You would have been safe. You wouldn't have to worry about rent or health care. I wanted to make sure you were taken care of because I didn't think you had the stomach for the business." The room went silent. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. I felt a physical blow to my chest. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, hollow ache. "You were going to pay me off," I whispered, like a child on an allowance. "I was protecting you," Dad insisted. "This business is hard. It is nasty. I watched you with your art projects and your little websites. You are soft. Harper, you always were. I didn't want you to get eaten alive." "I am not soft," I said. my voice shaking. "I am the one who just bought you out. How can you sit there and call me soft when I am the one holding the keys?" "Because you bought them," Brooke yelled. "You didn't earn them. You just proved you have money. Harper, that doesn't prove you have value. Anyone can write a check if they are desperate enough." I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "You are wrong," I said. I looked at Brooke, then at Dad. "I used money to buy the right to prove my value, because you were never going to give me that chance for free. You were going to lock me out. You were going to put me on an allowance and pat me on the head until I died. I had to buy the building just to get you to open the door." I looked at my mother. She was staring at me, her hand covering her mouth. But for the first time in my life, I didn't see disappointment in her eyes. I saw fear. She was afraid because she realized she didn't know me. She realized that while she had spent her life deferring to my father, asking for permission, waiting for approval, I had gone out and seized power with my own 2 hands. I had done the one thing she had never dared to do. I had stopped needing them. "I do not need your applause," I said, my voice steadying, becoming steel. "I do not need you to tell me I am smart. I do not need you to tell me I am worthy. I really don't. I just need you to stop laughing when I speak." I threw my napkin on the table. It landed on the untouched roast. "The market doesn't care about your estate plan, Dad," I said. "The market doesn't care about your feelings, Mom, and it certainly doesn't care about your seniority. Brooke, the market cares about results. And starting tomorrow, that is all I'm going to give you." I walked out of the dining room. I walked past the family photos where I was always in the background. I walked out the front door into the cool night air. Behind me, the house was silent. They were sitting in the wreckage of their assumptions. 3 people trapped in roles that no longer fit because the script had been burned. I got into my car and started the engine. I had a meeting with the tech team at 7 in the morning. I didn't have time to mourn the family I never really had. I had a company to run. The extraordinary shareholder meeting began at 9 o'clock sharp. The air in the executive conference room was not just tense, it was pressurized. This was not the small strategy room down the hall. This was the main boardroom, a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray industrial sprawl of Cleveland. The table was a long slab of polished oak that looked like it could withstand a bomb blast. I sat on the right side of the table. My laptop was closed in front of me. To my left sat the representative from Stonebridge Harbor Capital, a sharp-eyed man named Marcus who wore a suit that cost more than my first car. Across from us were 3 minor shareholders, older men who had held stock since the 80s and looked at me with a mixture of confusion and skepticism. And at the head of the table stood my father. Robert Quinn looked impeccable in his navy suit, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He gripped the back of his leather chair as if he were trying to crush the upholstery. Brooke sat to his right, clutching a notepad, her knuckles white. She looked like a student who had forgotten to study for the final exam. "Let's bring this meeting to order," Dad said, his voice booming with forced authority. "We have a lot to get through. I want to address the rumors circulating about the ownership structure of my company." The corporate counsel, a man named Mr. Sterling, who had been with the firm for 30 years, cleared his throat. It was a soft sound, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gavel strike. "Excuse me, Robert," Sterling said, adjusting his glasses, "but for the sake of the minutes, we need to be precise. Legally speaking, this is the company of the shareholders, and as of 48 hours ago, the controlling interest belongs to Quinn Meridian Holdings." Dad flinched. It was subtle, a quick tightening of the eyes, but everyone saw it. He had walked into the room trying to project the image of the undisputed king, and his own lawyer had just corrected him in front of an audience. "Right," Dad said, his voice tighter. "As I said, the ownership structure. We are here to discuss the path forward." He gestured vaguely toward me. He didn't say my name. He just waved a hand in my direction as if I were a piece of furniture that had been unexpectedly rearranged. "The chair recognizes the representative from Quinn Meridian," Dad grunted. I stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't look at Brooke. I plugged my laptop into the main console. The screen behind my father flickered to life. "Thank you," I said. My voice was calm, pitched low to carry across the room without shouting. "I have reviewed the operational reports for the last 5 years. The conclusion is simple. We are bleeding, and if we do not apply a tourniquet immediately, Redwood Axis will be insolvent within 36 months. A murmur went through the room. One of the old shareholders, a man named Mr. Henderson, who still believed fax machines were efficient, scoffed loudly. "Insolvent?" Henderson said, leaning forward. "We have assets. We have trucks. We have the Quinn name. You are being dramatic. Young lady, this is a logistics company, not a tech startup. We move real things." "And we are losing real money," I countered. I clicked the remote. The screen displayed a heat map of our distribution network. "This is our current tracking efficiency. The red zones represent delays. We are averaging 4 hours of dead time per driver per week because our dispatch system relies on phone calls and manual logs. Do you know what our competitors average?" "It does not matter what they average," Henderson snapped. "They do not have our relationships." "They average 12 minutes," I said, "and relationships do not pay for fuel. Mr. Henderson, efficiency does." I moved to the next slide. This was the kill shot. "This is the 12-month restructuring plan," I said. Item 1. We are canceling the construction of the Columbus Distribution Center immediately. Brooke stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "You cannot do that," she shouted. "That is the future of our expansion. We have already broken ground. The press release is drafted. The feasibility study shows a negative return on investment for 7 years, I said, looking at her without blinking. The location is saturated. The labor costs are 20% higher than the state average. It is a vanity project. Brooke, it is a monument to an expansion strategy that expired in 2010. Dad, Brooke pleaded, turning to him. Tell her she doesn't know what she's talking about. Dad looked at the screen. He looked at the numbers I had projected. The projected losses from the Columbus site versus the capital required to save it. He knew how to read a balance sheet. He knew I was right. But admitting it meant admitting he had approved a disaster. It is a sunk cost, Dad said heavily. We have already spent $200,000 on the permits. Henderson slammed his hand on the table. Content channel? Tracking portal? This is nonsense. This is just digital fluff for kids on social media. Our clients are 60-year-old warehouse managers. They do not care about a website. Actually, I said, they do. I clicked to the final slide. It was a case study of the distributor I had helped in Indiana. This is Kavanaugh Heavy Industries, I said. Their purchasing manager is 62 years old. Last year, he increased his order volume by 40%. Why? Because I built them a portal where he could track his shipments on his iPad while he was fishing. He didn't have to call anyone. He didn't have to wait on hold. He just tapped a screen. Convenience is not for kids. Mr. Henderson, convenience is for busy people who write big checks. The room went silent. Henderson opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the revenue growth on the screen. He couldn't argue with 40%. Brooke was shaking. This is ridiculous. You are turning us into a computer company. You are going to fire the dispatchers. You are going to ruin the culture. I am going to save the payroll, I said. I checked the internal cash flow projection you prepared for the board. Brooke, I found it on the shared drive. I pulled up a document. It was Brooke's own internal memo, one she hadn't shown Dad. Your own projection shows that under the current operating model, we will miss payroll in 18 months. I said, you knew we were drowning. You just hoped the new warehouse would magically fix it. Brooke went pale. She looked at Dad. Dad looked at the document on the screen. He saw his daughter's name on the header. He saw the red numbers at the bottom. Brooke, Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. You told me we had reserves for 3 years. I was projecting growth, Brooke stammered. I was optimistic. You were lying, I said, to the board and to yourself. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Dad looked at Brooke. and I saw the light go out of his eyes. The illusion was gone. He couldn't pretend she was the heir anymore. She was a liability. Then, Marcus from Stonebridge cleared his throat. "If I may," Marcus said. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. "Stonebridge has reviewed Ms. Quinn's proposal. We have also independently verified her track record with other firms in the sector." He looked at Dad. "Robert, we have been worried about your liquidity for a long time," Marcus said. "We were considering calling in your loans, but this plan, this digital pivot, this is viable. In fact, if Harper leads the implementation, Stonebridge is willing to extend a new line of credit to finance the technology upgrades. We are betting on her." The heir left the room. It was done. The market had spoken. The money had spoken. Dad stood there, alone at the head of the table. He looked at Henderson, who was nodding slowly. He looked at Stonebridge. He looked at Brooke, who was staring at her lap. And then he looked at me. He had a choice. He could fight me. He could scream and yell and burn the company down out of spite. He could try to sue me. He could drag this out for years while the business collapsed around us. Or he could do the one thing he had always told me a good businessman does: adapt. He looked at the slide deck. He saw the future he had been too stubborn to build. "I built this place," Dad said softly. "I laid the first brick." "I know," I said, "and I am here to make sure the walls do not fall down." Dad took a deep breath. He straightened his tie. He looked at the room, addressing the shareholders, the lawyers, and the money men. "The proposal regarding the Columbus Center is accepted," Dad said. His voice was firm again, but it was different. "We will liquidate the land. We will pivot to the digital strategy." He turned to me. "Harper," he said. He didn't say it like he was talking to a child. He didn't say it with a sneer. "You lead this division. You have full autonomy on the implementation. I will handle the unions and the legacy partners. I will support your transition." The room exhaled. "Thank you," I said. "And," Dad added, pausing as if the words were stuck in his throat, We need to schedule a press conference next week to announce the new direction." He had said, "we." He didn't say, "I will announce it." He didn't say, "My company is changing." He said, "we." The meeting adjourned 10 minutes later. The shareholders filed out, shaking my hand as they left. Henderson even gave me a nod of respect. Brooke left without a word, slipping out the side door like a ghost. I packed up my laptop. The room was empty now, except for the echo of the victory. I walked out into the hallway. I walked past the photos. I walked past the image of Dad cutting the ribbon. I walked past the family portrait where I was shoved to the side. I paused for a second, looking at my own face in the glass. I looked scared in that photo. I looked unsure. I caught my reflection in the glass over the photo. The woman looking back at me now wasn't scared. She was tired, yes, but she was formidable. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Brooke. "You actually did it." There was no angry emoji, no accusation, no sarcasm, just a simple, stark admission of reality. She had finally seen me. I looked at the cursor blinking in the reply box. I thought about typing something snarky. I thought about typing an apology. I thought about typing, "I told you so." I turned off the screen without replying. I didn't have time for sibling rivalry anymore. I had a meeting with the development team in 20 minutes. I had a website to rebuild. I had a legacy to secure. I put the phone in my pocket and walked toward the elevators, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm on the floor my father had laid, in the building I had saved. For the first time, when Dad talked about the company's future, he had to say "we," and for me, that was the sweetest revenge a career once mocked by my whole family could ever deliver. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Harper's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story get heard by even more people. Your support means the world to us.